it's Sue Stockdale, and welcome to the Access to Inspiration podcast, the show where you can gain inspiration from people who may be unlike you. We hope their stories and insights enable you to transcend your day-to-day challenges and reflect on what you are capable of achieving. Now, if you like the saying that a picture is 1,000 words, then you'll find today's guest fascinating. Tanmay Vora is founder of QAspire Consulting. He illustrates and shares great ideas in the form of sketchnotes that combine the topics of leadership, learning, and change. He is also a senior business leader and will explain today how self-directed learning helped him to create a successful career. Welcome to the podcast, Tanmay.
Thank you for having me here, Sue. I'm really thrilled to have this conversation.
Well, I must say that sometimes our listener likes to know how I find our guests. And you came to me, not, I must say, because of knowing you personally, but of knowing your illustrations. I saw one, I read an article, I think it was about influencing leadership, and I shared it with a number of my clients, and many of them came back to me and said how useful it was, how practical and insightful it was. So I thought, well, if they're finding it useful, I must find out who has created those wonderful illustrations. And it led me to you, which I'm delighted about. So please tell me, how did you get started with illustrating?
Well, it's a long story. I'll try to cut it a little short, but without losing the essence. So I have been blogging since 2006 when I was a new manager, and I've been writing about leadership, learning, and change all the time. And in the initial part of my journey, it was more about documenting my own lessons. But as I went through the process, I realized that what I write is consumed by tens and thousands of people across the globe. And very soon I started looking at my blogging as an intersection of my own need to learn versus my need to share it with others in a meaningful way. And the moment I realized that, I've been experimenting with different forms of writing and expressing. I've written 100-word articles and 100-word stories. I've written a tweet book. That was my first book in 2009, was in form of a tweet book. So it was a collection of tweets on a certain topic. And so that pursuit of simplifying lessons and insights, and as we went from 2009 to 2021, the information explosion has happened. Content explosion has happened. And there's so much of noise that I wanted to sort of distill the signals away from noise. And in 2015, thanks to one of my friends, Abhijit Bhaduri, he does a lot of scribbling, and I came across this. And having some background in drawing and architecture, I thought I must give this a shot. And I decided that I will illustrate ideas on leadership, learning, and change, which is essentially my domain, and create a small intersection where I create a category of one where I do a lot of illustrations that are consumed by a lot of people across the globe. And that's how I started sketching. But I didn't have this clear idea that I will be doing this with such a focused manner. I think what happens is there's a lot of trial and error. So I created the first one, I shared it out. A couple of people said that it was really, really good. And I said, if this draft is so good, why don't I elevate my game? And so I brought some new sketch pens and new writing pad and stuff like that. Eventually, these visual notes started getting viral. And then I realized that I must now really make it meaningful. And again, that intersection came into play in terms of my need to share versus my need to learn myself. And that's how I now do the sketch notes on iPad with Apple Pencil. So I've now focused on that usability aspect as well, which probably I didn't focus on earlier in the game. So it's been a lessons learned along the way, and I plow those lessons back into what I do. And that's how a difference is made, step by step.
It's really fascinating to hear that process of iteration, that you're keeping improving what you're doing. And having watched your TEDx talk around self-directed learning, it also made me realize that perhaps your interest in learning started way back when you were younger. And I'm wondering if you can just give us a sense of how your interest in learning developed from a young person.
After passing my schooling with very average grades, I spent almost 1 year trying to figure out what I want to do next. And a lot of people say I wasted that year, but I would like to think now in the hindsight that I invested that year. I dabbled into a lot of disciplines because I was reasonably good at drawing. I got admission into architecture, didn't like it as a profession, so I moved into industrial chemistry, spent a few months there, didn't like it, moved into civil engineering thinking that I can leverage my drawings there. Again, I didn't like it. And at the end of the year, I was back to square one with nowhere to go. But I was equipped with a lot of understanding of what I really don't like to do. And that I think was a powerful motivator. I finally zeroed in on computer applications as an area that I really want to focus on. So there's a lot of application of logic when you write computer programs, and writing came in naturally to me. My father is a writer, and he's written 25 one-act plays for the back in time for All India Radio and stuff like that. So he's been a prolific reader and writer, and I was always surrounded by books and literary sort of work. So writing came in naturally to me. And it so happened that in year 2001, when the dot-com bubble burst and September 11 attacks happened in the US and we lost all of our clients, and I was laid off. I almost struggled for a year trying to figure out what to do next because there were no jobs in the market and I didn't know how to find one. At that point, in a silent moment, I sat down with a piece of paper and a pen and I said, what do I already have as an inventory of skills? I wrote down those skills on a piece of paper and circled them around. And then almost magically, I saw those two circles coming together and forming a small intersection. The two words that I wrote was technology and writing. And I said that what if I bring these two circles together and see where it intersects? And I found an intersection in technical writing. And that became my way of getting back into the corporate life. And I've never looked back after that. So I realized the importance of playing at the intersections very early in my career. Fortunately, when I didn't have too many liabilities and responsibilities, I was able to sort of experiment with these things. Yeah, that was my first use of Venn diagram as well, by the way. I had studied Venn diagrams in mathematics in school, but this was the first time that I meaningfully applied a Venn diagram into my own career context and found something really, really meaningful. So dabbling into multiple pursuits then started to happen. Now, this need for doing what I really, really like versus the dislike for not doing anything that I don't like. I found that strong preference in myself. And therefore, my trajectory of career looks like this, that I started my career as a teacher. I used to teach technology. I got into computer programming, then got into technical writing. Then I got into project level quality management. From there, I went into consultative selling, traveled across the globe, selling services and solutions to the customers. From there, I got into enterprise quality role. And from there, I got into organizational leadership role. So if somebody says, how do you climb a mountain? I would say that don't try to climb it straight in a linear fashion, but try to sort of crisscross your way on the top of the mountain. And that's exactly what worked for me. Then I started blogging in 2006. And again, I was writing about quality from a process perspective. And I realized that just having process doesn't ensure quality. You need to have people, have culture, leadership. So again, I found an intersection between the quality we deliver to customers and how we internally create a culture of excellence. So that was again an intersection that led to my blog. Blog led to a lot of opportunities, speaking gigs, books, leadership, and all of those things. The key thing that worked for me is the realization that the absolute areas are really, really crowded. So if you look at people in HR, there are so many people who are working in HR. If you look at quality, there are so many people who are far more expert on quality than I am. But if you look at that small intersection where how do you build a people-centered culture to deliver quality, then I think that's an intersection where few people are playing. All my initiatives have been at the intersections of two different disciplines where they intersect. And obviously, my strong like and dislike for what I want to do, what difference I want to see in the world because of my work has led to this thing that I've not settled into a role and said, okay, now I'm going to do this for a lifetime. Now, in my previous stint, I was the country managing director for a large Finnish organization having a center in India. In India, I was managing about 700 people at its peak. And I thought this is something I would do for my lifetime. And after a couple of years, I realized that this is not what I want to do all my life. And then so I got back and now I've started my own consulting practice and stuff like that. So I think I have a certain time frame when I get bored with the status quo. The moment I get comfortable with something is the moment I get uncomfortable with it. I also don't like to be labeled as one thing. So people say that Tanmay Vora is a illustrator or he's a business leader only or he's just doing a job, whatever. I don't like to be labeled. And I think that multidisciplinary polymathic generalism is what I pursue. I try to dabble into multiple disciplines and try to engage myself into metacognition with respect to how does these disciplines give me insights that are portable across different disciplines and so on. So that's really the kind of work that I do in self-directed learning.
Hi, it's me again. I hope you're enjoying what Tanmay has to say. And to make sure that you keep up to date with all the news from us, why not sign up for our newsletter? You can do so by going to our website, accesstoinspiration.org, and at the foot of the homepage, you'll find the link there. You'll also be able to read transcriptions of all the podcasts on the website. And while you're there, please take a moment to leave us some feedback about what you think about the podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. Now back to Tanmay. You're reminding me of one of my jobs way back at the start of my career when I was in quality management, and our model was a Venn diagram of 3 circles intersecting people, processes, and commitment.
Absolutely.
And that was what we were trying to sell into the organization. It also strikes me, as you're speaking, Tanmay, something that seems to be important for you about curiosity and following your areas of interest, perhaps getting away from those areas of disinterest. Would you say that curiosity is an important part of what drives you?
Absolutely. Curiosity is important. And I think that a lot of people equate learning with outcomes. And they say that if I learn this, what am I going to get in return? And so the ROI of learning is always on the back of my mind. And in fact, a lot of people try to learn things with ROI in mind. That's probably a misplaced way to learn, in my view, because I think that the best learning, the most inventive form of learning, the most innovative form of learning does not happen when you look at ROI, because the moment there is an ROI established for any learning initiative is when that learning has probably become a commodity. The emergent learning in emerging form always happens to trial and error. Trial and error is not possible without curiosity, without genuine inspiration, without a need to just dabble into something for the sake of it, not knowing the outcome, being very comfortable with the messiness of that whole process. I think all of these things are important, but curiosity sits at the heart of it, because without being genuinely curious, it's really very hard to take that first important step in dabbling into it. And by the way, having alternative pursuits means that you are not completely dependent on what you're learning now. You already have something else going. So when I learned sketchnote, I was having the senior corporate role. Even if I failed at learning sketchnotes, or even if I failed at learning how to speak well, the stakes were really, really low because I already had something else that was working for me. And the best time to learn something else is when something else is working for you, and not when you are in the dire need to learn to survive.
As you're talking, you use the word inspiration, Tanmay, and of course, you know the title for this podcast is Access to Inspiration. I'm wondering what inspires you, or who inspires you?
I think the best form of inspiration is the one that comes from within. However, for inspiration from within to stem, we need to create a right culture and ecosystem. So inspiration is like a seed that grows inside of you, but not without soil and not without the sunlight. The analogy that I often use is that if inspiration is the seed, then we need sunlight. Sunlight is harsh sometimes. And so the external challenges, when the inspiration is happening when it's applied to an external context, a problem that we are trying to solve. So problems that we solve, the challenges that we face is the sunlight. We also need fertile soil and manure. And I think that the soil in which the seed really grows is community. It's learning with others. No essential learning happens in isolation. And therefore, and especially in a connected world, we are doing it wrong if you're not engaging with the community. What I think inspires me is the fact that I'm a part of a community that is a bunch of really generous, knowledgeable, kind people who are sharing what they learn along the way. I take what I learn from them and apply it into my context. Fortunately, I had always had a playground of corporate roles where I could apply these lessons and see what comes back to me uniquely as my own lessons or my own learning. And then I have an intrinsic need to share those lessons with others. So it creates a fertile soil for inspiration to happen. And there are times when inspiration doesn't come. And I also feel that inspiration comes to those who are prepared. And many years ago, I heard Stephen Pressfield say that the muse and the inspiration is always around you, but it does not come to you like that. It is an invisible force somewhere up there. It sees if you're ready and if you're prepared for the muse to strike to you. And then, so what he said is that when he is lacking inspiration, he doesn't sulk. He doesn't sit in a corner of a room. What he does is he gets up, gets in the morning, gets ready, sits and faces that blank screen, ready to engage with it. And then the inspiration comes and says, yes, this guy is now ready. Let me do it. So I feel that being prepared, being consistent and showing up in your pursuit every single day, irrespective of whether you're inspired or not, I think gets the inspiration going. That's just a little bit of thinking that I have around inspiration.
Well, it's really useful to hear that. It's creating the habit of being prepared to be inspired. If you're sitting there with a blank screen, so to speak, Tanmay, and you're thinking about what to create as your next visual note, where does your inspiration come from then? Do you just have that practice of then waiting for something to appear?
What I do, Sue, is that it's a very detailed process that I use. I constantly engage with meaningful sources of information and insight. And when I encounter them, I first bookmark them. I don't skim through the information, but I bookmark them and take a few notes into my OneNote on my writing pad or whatever. I revisit that topic and I create an inventory of ideas that I feel are complex and ideas that I feel need to be shared widely and broadly enough. And mostly I try to visualize ideas that are not tactical in nature. So things like 5 things to do to engage your employees, that's not the kind of content that I would like to engage in. I like to engage in ideas that are sort of timeless. Like Peter Drucker's Managing Oneself, for example, is timeless. And it will help my own kids when they grow up. If they read my visual notes, they're going to read and they're going to benefit from it. So I look for the shelf life of ideas and I create a backlog of ideas that I want to visualize. Now, what this helps me with is that when I have an intent to create a visual note and I sit there, I don't have to struggle for what to sketch. I don't have to scout for ideas. I have a backlog of ideas, and based on my intuition on that particular day, I would pick any one of them, and I know that it's something that I have chosen. So then there is no question of choosing one over the other. I can just choose any one of them and start visualizing. And this also sort of is a very immersive way of learning new things, because when you are first taking notes and then you're making sketch notes, what happens is it becomes a part of your subconscious mind, and therefore you are almost internalizing that idea without the needing to write or read a book when you need to. A lot of people prepare for things when they need it. They will go read the book and then prepare, take notes. In my case, because note taking is a constant process, I don't need to scout for inspiration. It's already there. I just need to align myself. So the challenge is not to find an idea, but the challenge is to align myself in a way that I can best represent that idea in a way that helps me and then helps others.
You're just picking up on what was going through my mind, Tanmay, around as about your readiness. One of the things I often observe with people who want to try something new, for example, trying out creating a podcast or drawing a sketch, anything it could be, is that they apply judgment. They think, well, who am I to do that? Or nobody will read it or nobody will listen to it. How do you manage that judge, if there is such a thing inside your head? How do you make sure that you are open and prepared?
Well, I think that I don't fear judgment that much, because part and parcel of working out loud in public is that you're going to get some criticism all the time. However, I try to sort of circumvent the risk of judgment with the substance, saying that if this is going to help a lot of people, I can't go wrong. So I keep my focus on how this will help a lot of people. And because any artist or any pursuit is not meant for everybody. And I've learned this lesson the hard way from Seth Godin, who happens to be one of my heroes as well, that you don't play for everybody. Because if you're trying to do everything for everybody, then you are probably doing nothing for nobody. And that sort of thing. So I try to look at the persona. Who are those people that I'm doing this for? And there are some sketch notes that are specifically meant for coaches and consultants. There are some sketch notes that are meant for people who are new managers. So having that lens, very clear lens of why I'm doing this particular sketch note is very, very important. And now I am in the process of creating sketch note packages where I would say that here are 50 sketch notes that can be used by coaches and consultants. Here are sketch notes for a new manager. Here are sketch notes for an executive. So there are a lot of different slicing and dicing that now I can do with my sketch note. But the idea is, will this be useful to someone? And if it is, then I just go with it without worrying about the judgment part of it.
So you have a higher belief that it will be of value to somebody when you create for a bigger audience.
Absolutely.
That makes sense. It strikes me also, Tanmay, that you have got a lot of wisdom in your life, and you're bringing that wisdom and your insight to the intersection of your ideas and the learnings that you're gaining. I'm wondering, first of all, if you would agree with me that you share wisdom. And if you do, then where do you think wisdom comes from?
I would like to say that I share my wisdom, but more than my own wisdom, I also curate wisdom from different sources. People who inspire me, it is my way of paying them back in some form or the other. However, I feel that in a connected world, wisdom is a product of what you learn, how you apply what you learn, and the communities that you learn and share with. Wisdom doesn't happen in isolation, and wisdom doesn't come easy. I think we are too busy in applying our knowledge, but what we need is that wisdom happens when we take a step back and start reflecting on what we've done. And what I see in organizations today, in teams today, and even in individuals today is that they are almost like on a treadmill of execution. They just execute, 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 but they don't step back and say, hey, wait a moment, what are we doing? Why are we doing what we are doing? How can we improve it? How did we do? Where did we miss out? What can be optimized? What should we stop doing? These are all important questions to ask, and people don't ask. So I think that what we learn from what we apply and then reflecting upon it and creating it in a way and form that we can share with the outer world. We say, hey, I did this large transformation project. This is how we went about it. And these are 8 things that I've learned. These are my own lessons coming from my own context and my own application. So it's more of internalizing the ideas that you consume from outside by applying them into your context. I think that is where wisdom really develops. In my personal case, blogging and writing has always kept me in touch with latest thinking. My role enabled me to apply what I learned. And I think processing these experiences, reflecting upon it in a quiet moment is what gives me clarity on what matters the most. And you might call it wisdom, you might call it insights, you might call it lessons, but I think it's just a combination of a lot of different things that happens together.
Your words are music to my ears, Tanmay, because as a coach, I think that space for reflection is what the clients I work with really value, is just having that conversation and moment to reflect and think, what and why are they doing what they're doing? As you then look at the intersection of the 3 things that you're paying attention to, leadership, learning, and change, what do you think is going to be emerging from a global perspective when you put those 3 things together going forwards?
I think that what is very important from a leadership, learning, and change perspective is that these 3 things are extremely interdependent with each other. There is no leadership if there is no change. If there is no change, there is no learning. And there is no leadership without learning. So in a way, they are extremely interconnected and interdependent. But what lies at the intersection of these 3 things, leadership, learning, and change, is people. And everything that enables people to shift to a better mindset, anything that enables people to do what they're doing in a better way, anything that alleviates the problems that people are facing, is all going to matter a lot in the world that we're going into. I think we need to connect with our people at a deeper level. And I think it's harder in a virtual world to connect with people. But I think that engaging with people in one-to-one formats, frequent check-ins, building that sense of belongingness in the organization, exposing your own vulnerabilities as a leader so that, that's how connection will really, really happen. And I think it's very important. The other couple of pieces are collaboration, really breaking down the silos and enabling people to really come together and think about the larger context and purpose rather than playing within their departmental boundaries. And all this calls for systems thinking. I've been a huge fan of Peter Senge's work on organizational learning. And I think looking at the whole rather than trying to optimize the parts of the whole game. I think those are some of the very important things from a leadership perspective, from a learning perspective, and from a change perspective. I think it's very, very important.
Many of those things, if not all the things you've talked about there, Tanmay, are topics that really excite me and that I see the direction that leadership needs to go into the future. So my final question to you is around the use of pictures as opposed to detailed text. I'm wondering then, do you think that plays into your areas of interest? And why do you think the visual is becoming even more to the fore these days?
Well, I think the technology is only accelerating the visual ways of thinking. However, I would like to think that we were born as visual thinkers. We were born as visual creatures, and then we were programmed out of our visual thinking with our orientation to a lot of textual material in the school and in the colleges. We would process pages and pages of text, write long answers. However, before we started writing A, B, and C, we created scribbles. If you give a pencil to a 2-year-old, he or she is going to just draw first and not write first. My pursuit is to take people back into that stage of their life where they were fearless in making the mark on a piece of paper. This is, I think, the core of why I do what I do. However, our brain, and now after having spent 4 or 5 years doing visuals, I've realized that I've understood the science behind the visuals. And the science is that our brain is a visual processing powerhouse. We process visual information about 60,000 times faster than the textual information. And that is why if you go to the airports, you see standard signages and you know that this is an exit sign, you know that this is where washrooms are located and so on. Our brain instantly sees something and says, yes, this is what. and decides in a fraction of a second based on a visual. Interestingly, visual processing of visuals in our brain happens in the same area that also processes emotions, which is why when you're watching a movie and there is a very emotional moment that goes in there, a lot of people have tears in their eyes. That's because there's something visual in front of them that moves their emotions. I think visual thinking has always been there. In fact, human beings 50, 60,000 years back, when they did not have pen and paper, they used to draw on stones. They would basically carve out stones to communicate what they wanted to communicate. So, in a way, drawing and thinking have been associated with each other very tightly since the evolution of human beings. It's only now that because we are in the middle of information explosion that this starts to matter all the more.
Well, it's wonderful that we've gone full circle and are coming back to the simplicity of the visual to really stimulate our thinking. And it's certainly stimulated my thinking today, Tanmay, having a conversation with you. If people want to find out more about the work that you do, and of course to see some of those visuals that you create, how might they be able to do that on the internet?
All my work is hosted at my website, which is called QAspire.com. I created this website when I was a quality professional and I had a deep aspiration to deliver quality. So I named it as QAspire.com. And that's where people can find me. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn as at TN Vora. It's TNVORA. And that's where you can find most of my work.
Well, it's brilliant. I'm sure our listener will be heading over there to have a look at those visual as they're imagining them in their minds having our conversation today. Thank you so much for your time, Tanmay. It's been really fascinating to understand what inspires you to create such wonderful visuals for us to be inspired by ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
I hope you've enjoyed my conversation with Tanmay Vora and that he has inspired you to pick up your pencil and start drawing. In the next episode, which will be the final one in this series about 21st century changemakers, we will consider how you could change yourself when you're faced with life-threatening circumstances. I will be talking to Palwasha Siddiqui, whose life changed completely when she endured the civil war in Afghanistan as a child in 1989 and has gone on to develop a successful career in business. I do hope you can join us then.